looking at social media, I always tell businesses and organizations that I'm consulting with, and even students, while you're looking at each of the social media platforms, you have to look at both the positives and the negatives. You have to have a balanced perspective. And a lot of times you see some individuals have only positive views of what social media can do, and on the flip side you have other professionals and individuals that think social media is the end of civilization. My goal is to kind of get in the middle and understand both sides of the coin. So there are a lot of challenges that we have to address in crisis communications and social media. First and foremost, we're dealing with a wide range of multi-context, multi-voices in a very multi-dimensional landscape. We're sharing videos, comments. Everyone has the power of being their own media outlet. So an organization and company doesn't necessarily control the message, and so that could be quite scary at times for organizations and businesses. But one researcher who I think is really visionary in this field, Tim Coombs, he's written several books, he's done lots of research in this area. He talked about what we're facing right now is kind of this black swan mentality. And so when you think about swans, you are very aware of the white swans, but you see those black swans, those anomalies. He says, and sometimes in crisis communications and social media, we focus too much on one instance without looking at the complete picture. And that is a challenge. There's so much information we're getting inundated with, we focus on one category. But there is also a challenge of different age cohorts and expectations. It seems to be only a few years ago, everyone's like, well, this new thing called Twitter, we all need to get on board with that. Now it's become more of a traditional form of social media, but everyone else is kind of moving on to some of the younger generations for mobile apps, WhatsApp, Snapchat, to communicate and engage. And there's a lot of concern with senior management, like how do we manage all of these platforms? How do we make sure we're addressing all of these points regularly, and how do we sustain that education? So those are just a couple of challenges that we are seeing in the field. And I think the other thing that we're dealing with too is there's a lot of not only voices and information coming across on social media in a crisis, but there's a lot of false information. There's people intentionally interjecting themselves into the conversation to get that 15 minutes of fame. That in a life or death situation, in a crisis, that can be really distracting and shift the narrative away from the real purpose. So these are just some of the crises and challenges that we are seeing, along with being the pressure to be sustainable in our educational practices. And a lot of times I talk to students that have graduated from my program, they're thrown into the front lines and, okay, you're young, you're digital natives, you have to be the voice of our company. And you see the common basically excuse from a lot of these friends that if something happens on social media, they're like, well, blame the intern. Where I think we're really in a day and age that we have to basically integrate social media as part of our entire crisis communication plan. So those are just some of the challenges, but I want to shift over to some of the opportunities that we have, especially for research and collaboration and practice. One of the things that I think is really exciting right now in social media crisis communications is this bridge between practice and research. And as academics, as professionals in the field of communication, we can definitely reach out to agencies and companies because they're looking for research in this area to help apply into their business practices. And so I've done several consulting projects. One of them is with a social media monitoring company. It's a global company based out of Vancouver, Canada. And they were honest. They said, we know social media, but we need the crisis communication expert. Can we partner with each other? And so we've actually been doing research together, so you have that hybrid perspective, which I think is a great opportunity that we're seeing right now in crisis communication. So there's not only great opportunities in terms of collaborating with other practitioners and brands and organizations in this field, but also looking around in this room. We're all coming in from not only different disciplines within communications, but different countries. So there's a huge growth of networking, collaborating, and exploring these topics in social media and crisis communications. And so we're breaking down the barriers. We can use this technology to help and collaborate with others. And so I think that the other thing that is really important to look at is not only looking at just the crisis communicator, but looking at individuals who have their own influence, power of influencers who have a strong voice and are able to collaborate and help extend the conversations further on social media. It's not just the organization that has to communicate during a crisis, but you can, build up your community to be able to empower the advocates to share your knowledge as well, because with multiple voices and everything, we need to use all the tools that we have in users. So that's basically what I have in terms of challenges and opportunities, and so I'm asked a lot of times, what's next? What's coming up in terms of practice and research? What are some things that we need to be aware of in terms of social media and crisis communications? I definitely think that there is going to be a growth in multimedia, looking at how we share information in a multimedia context. And so with some of the more popular apps, you're seeing kind of these evolutions of more videos, pictures, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We've seen a couple of live streaming video apps. One in particular that was recently bought by Twitter is Periscope. And this live streaming app was already used in a crisis in New York City, where there was a building that was burning in Manhattan. So all social media platforms, if you look at them, have been defined by a crisis in some capacity, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. So it's almost like this life cycle where basically you're kind of expecting, if a new platform comes across, you're like, okay, here's some great things that can happen, but then you have to think about what could happen that could be, how could this app be used in a crisis, proactively or unproactively. And so I think that's one of the challenges that we have in terms of future directions, is to be at the forefront, to have these discussions with both researchers and practitioners to best communicate, okay, here's kind of the things that we could be prepared for, and let's adapt our practices in real time. We don't have to come across with a completely new social media plan. We just have to integrate social media into our crisis plan on a regular basis and keep it updated, because it's constantly changing. I mean, it was a few years ago when I was a master's student, everyone was talking about Second Life, and I know we had a conversation a little bit earlier, who's on Second Life now. So it's constantly flowing, everyone's saying, okay, I'm on to the next best thing. So I think we need to use our network and our own community as researchers and practitioners to educate ourselves. I think education, information is power in this area, and we're all in the kind of the same boat, and if we're able to share our insights and share our expertise at conferences like this, and share them also with practitioners. They're willing to listen to researchers, and I think the bridge that we need to communicate with other researchers and practitioners is really important. So that's one thing that I think is really key here, and I think the other thing that we need to look at, two final points, the need for strong leadership. There is a gap in some companies and some agencies where there's a lot of movement on the front line saying, yes, we need social media, we understand the power of social media, but that top management is not willing to accept it. They're like, it's a fad, it's not relevant. I got that a lot when I was starting research and consulting in this area, so I know this very well. I think it's getting better, the barriers are breaking down, but it still needs work. We still need research findings to back up our support for why we need to be effectively communicating on social media. And I think the other thing we've talked about so far in this conference, my last point, is we need to focus on social media rather than just being a tool, but a mindset and a community. We need to look at the behaviors. What are behaviors that we want our users, our community in a crisis to do? How do we communicate that best fit their needs and expectations in real time? So we have to adapt these practices. We need to look at what they're expecting, what are the elements that they want us to communicate, and looking at the role of the crisis team on social media. Are there things that we need, perfect. Are there things that we need to basically adapt on a regular basis? How do we integrate this as part of our planning for crisis communication? So I think there's a lot of opportunities and challenges in social media and crisis communications, but this area specifically is constantly growing. If you're looking at always exploring new ways of applying various tools in terms of a crisis, this is a great field to be in. So, thank you.